Among the 17,000 registered species in the Interstellar Coalition Defense Initiative, humanity ranked somewhere between adorable and concerning. Not concerning in the way the Krethian hive mind was concerning, with their tendency to absorb entire planetary populations into their collective consciousness. No, humans were concerning the way a small, fluffy creature that keeps biting through reinforced steel cables is concerning. You want to pat it on the head, but you're also checking your insurance policy. The Orbital Academy of Advanced Tactical Studies, floating serenely above the gas giant Tiferon 7, had accepted its first batch of human cadets 3 cycles ago. The decision had sparked approximately 417 committee meetings, 6 diplomatic incidents, and 1 memorable occasion where Ambassador Plexen of the Vryn hegemony laughed so hard his secondary respiratory system collapsed. The vote had passed anyway, mostly because the coalition charter forbade discrimination based on species, and also because nobody wanted to be the civilization that officially called humans too fragile for military service. The public relations disaster alone would have been astronomical. The academy itself was a marvel of architectural engineering, designed to accommodate species ranging from the massive Gorath, who stood 4 meters tall and communicated through subsonic rumbling, to the diminutive pipsqueakers, whose entire platoon could fit in a standard equipment locker. The gravity generators alone cost more than most planetary defense systems, capable of adjusting localized fields to match any species' homeworld conditions. The cafeteria served 340 different atmospheric compositions. The bathroom situation was complicated enough to require its own administrative department. Commander Vraxen, a Keltharian with scales that shimmered like burnished copper and a military record that read like an adventure novel, stood on the observation deck overlooking Training Arena 12. His vertical pupils contracted as he watched the current exercise unfold below. 20 cadets from various species performed close-quarters combat drills, their movements tracked by holographic overlays that calculated strike force, reaction time, and tactical efficiency. And there, in the center of the chaos, was the human. She stood approximately 1.7 meters tall, which in galactic terms placed her squarely in the category of moderately sized species. Her skeletal structure was internal, which several species found disturbingly primitive. Her skin lacked any natural armor plating, radiation shielding, or chromatic adaptation capabilities. She possessed only 2 arms, 2 legs, and a single head, which the xenobiology instructor had described in his report as tragically inefficient. Her eyes saw in an extremely limited spectrum. Her hearing barely registered subsonic frequencies. By every measurable standard, she should have washed out of the program in the first week. She had not washed out. This fact caused Vraxen no small amount of private amusement and public consternation. The human had passed every physical examination, every endurance test, every tactical simulation thrown at her, not with exceptional scores, mind you. She hovered consistently in the acceptable range, that maddening zone where nobody could justify dismissal, but nobody could quite explain success either. Her combat techniques were unorthodox. Her strategy sessions raised eyebrows across 3 different species, and her habit of smiling before a fight deeply unnerved the psychological warfare department. The current exercise pitted cadets against each other in randomized matchups. The training mats could simulate various terrain conditions, from swamp muck to zero-gravity environments. Today's setting was standard, high-friction surface, 1 standard gravity equivalent. Basic, straightforward. The kind of scenario where superior physical attributes generally determine the victor. The human was currently paired against a Zephon, a species known for their impressive agility and their even more impressive ability to hold grudges across multiple generations. The Zephon Cadet, a lean specimen with 6 jointed limbs and reflexes that registered in the top 15% of the academy, circled warily. The human simply stood there, weight balanced, hands relaxed at her sides, waiting. Then there was Krath'nar. Krath'nar was a Dravokian,
And Dravokians were what happened when evolution decided that a species needed to be able to punch through reinforced bulkheads and consider it light exercise. Standing 2.4 meters tall, with muscle density that made titanium alloy look squishy, Krath'nar represented the pinnacle of physical combat superiority. His species had conquered their homeworld not through technology or cunning, but by literally wrestling the apex predators into submission. Their application to the coalition had been accepted immediately, mostly because nobody wanted to be on their bad side. Krath'nar held the distinction of being the top combat student in the academy. He also held the distinction of being insufferably aware of this fact. His victories in the arena were inevitably accompanied by what could only be described as performance art levels of gloating. He flexed, he roared, he performed victory dances that had been formally protested by 17 different species for various cultural reasons. The administration had given up trying to curb his behavior after he won the annual combat championship 3 cycles in a row, each time with increasingly dramatic finishing moves. Currently, Krath'nar was holding court near the edge of the training mat, surrounded by a cluster of admirers from various species who apparently enjoyed watching him critique other cadets' performances. His commentary on the human had been ongoing for the past 20 minutes, delivered in a booming voice that carried across the entire arena. Look at the tiny thing. Does it even have bones? I have seen better combat form from a Glarthian slug, and those creatures are literally invertebrates. Krathnar's laugh sounded like gravel being processed in an industrial crusher. Tell me, how does such a soft species expect to survive actual combat? What will it do? Bleed on the enemy until they slip and fall? His entourage laughed dutifully. Several of them glanced nervously at the human, who continued her match against the Zephon with the same calm, methodical approach she applied to everything. She was losing, technically. The Zephon's superior speed allowed for hit-and-run tactics that scored points without committing to full engagement. Standard practice for fighting an unknown opponent. I have seen the reports from their homeworld, Krath'nar continued, warming to his subject. Earth, they call it. Gravity barely worth mentioning. Atmosphere so thin I would suffocate. And the predators. Have you seen the predators on Earth? Small, weak. The humans are apex predators on their own world, and their world is a nursery. He flexed his primary arms, the muscles rippling with casual menace. Here is what I think. The coalition accepted them out of pity. Or perhaps as mascots. Yes, I can see it now. The human mascot performing tricks for morale. Very cute, very harmless. Commander Vraxen's eyes narrowed. He had served in the coalition military for 40 cycles, seen combat on 18 different worlds, and accumulated enough tactical experience to recognize a dangerous assumption when he heard one. Krathnar's assessment was not technically wrong. Humans were, by every measurable standard, less physically capable than most military species. Their strength was average. Their speed was average. Their natural defenses were laughable, but there was something in the way the human moved that triggered ancient instincts in Vraxen's hindbrain. A certain economy of motion, a patience that seemed at odds with her species' documented impulsiveness. She was not trying to win the current match through superior attributes. She was learning, adapting, cataloging every movement her opponent made with the focused intensity of a predator studying prey. The match ended. The Zephon won on points, as expected. The human bowed respectfully, a gesture from her homeworld that had been explained during cultural orientation. The Zephon returned the gesture, relief evident in the relaxation of his chitinous plates. He had won, yes, but something about fighting the human had clearly unsettled him. Krathnar's laughter echoed across the arena again. Magnificent! The human has mastered the art of losing with dignity. Truly, this is a valuable skill. Perhaps they will teach classes. The human turned slowly, her gaze tracking across the arena until it settled on Krath'nar. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Not anger, not even annoyance. It was the expression of someone calculating trajectory, force, and optimal impact points. The expression vanished so quickly that most observers missed it entirely. But Vraxen saw it, and despite himself, despite 40 cycles of military discipline and emotional control, he smiled. This was going to be interesting. The Academy's weekly integrated training exercises were designed by a committee that clearly believed suffering built character. Every 7th rotation, all cadets, regardless of specialization, were thrown into scenarios that combined multiple combat disciplines, strategic planning, and the kind of chaos that made insurance actuaries weep into their beverages of choice. The exercises were mandatory, graded, and had a medical evacuation rate that the administration preferred not to discuss during recruitment drives. This particular week's exercise was titled Adaptive Engagement Protocol, which in plain language meant everyone fights everyone until the instructors get bored or someone requires significant medical intervention. The rules were simple enough that even species without traditional linguistic processing could understand them. Last cadet standing wins. Environmental hazards would be randomly introduced. Gravity fluctuations were guaranteed. Complaining was permitted, but pointless. The announcement of the exercise sparked the usual mixture of excitement and dread across the cadet population. For top-tier fighters like Krath'nar, it represented an opportunity to showcase dominance across multiple opponents. For everyone else, it represented an opportunity to not get permanently injured while the top-tier fighters showcased their dominance. Krath'nar stood in the preparation area, going through what he generously called a warm-up routine, but what most species would classify as a small-scale natural disaster. He lifted weight bars that could anchor spacecraft. He struck practice dummies with enough force to trigger the emergency shutdown protocols. His roars of exertion rattled the observation windows, causing the technicians to adjust their audio dampeners for the 3rd time that morning. Another glorious day to demonstrate superiority, Krath'nar announced to nobody in particular, and everyone in general. His species had not evolved an indoor voice, which made conversations exhausting and library visits impossible. I predict 17 victories before the first environmental shift. Perhaps 18 if the opponents are particularly fragile. A cluster of cadets had gathered at a respectful distance, watching the display with expressions ranging from awe to mild nausea. Among them stood the human, quietly checking her equipment with the methodical precision of someone who treated preparation as a combat discipline itself. Her standard-issue combat suit fit snugly against her frame, the material designed to provide minimal protection while maximizing mobility. She wore no additional armor plating, no enhancement augmentations, no gravitational compensation rig, just the suit, standard-issue boots, and an expression of calm focus that several observers found mildly disturbing. Human, Krathnar's voice boomed across the preparation area like a tactical bombardment. I see you have arrived. Tell me, have you prepared your medical evacuation preferences? I understand your species has particular requirements for injury treatment. Soft bones require soft handling, yes? The human looked up from her equipment check. Her face remained neutral, but something in her eyes suggested she was mentally calculating angles and force vectors. Medical preferences are filed with the administration. Standard protocol. Excellent. Very professional. I admire this about your species. You document your own fragility with such precision. Krath'nar flexed his secondary arms in what his species considered a friendly gesture, but what most other species interpreted as a threat display. But perhaps you should consider withdrawing from this exercise. It would be unfortunate if your first cycle ended in the medical bay. Think of the paperwork alone. The human's response was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, the kind of smile that predators might wear while watching prey walk into an obvious trap. I appreciate the concern. I'll manage. Concern? Yes, concern is what I feel. Krath'nar turned to address his audience because everything was a performance when you were the undisputed combat champion. You see, the human is brave. Foolish, certainly, desperately outmatched, obviously, but brave, We must respect this quality, even as we prepare to demonstrate why bravery without strength is merely enthusiasm for losing. One of the other cadets, a Vryn with sensory tendrils that quivered with anxiety, whispered to his companion loud enough for several species to hear. "Should someone stop this, the human will be destroyed. Krath'nar has defeated opponents twice her size without sustaining damage." "The instructors monitor everything," his companion replied, a Keltharian whose scales had flushed to a worried amber. "They will intervene if necessary, probably. The medical team is on standby, usually." The conversation died as the exercise coordinator's voice crackled through the facility's communication system. Instructor Malvex, a Zerthian whose species had evolved in high-pressure environments and consequently had no patience for weakness, delivered the briefing with characteristic bluntness. "Cadets will proceed to Arena Complex 7. Initial gravity setting is 1.2 standard. Environmental hazards include mobile obstacles, atmospheric composition shifts, and randomized terrain modifications. Combat is full contact with standard safety protocols in effect. Safety protocols include automatic medical response for critical injuries, forced extraction for unconscious participants, and immediate termination of exercise in case of fatality risk. Try not to trigger the third option. It requires extensive paperwork." The cadets filed into the arena complex, a massive space that could have housed a small city. The ceiling arched 30 meters overhead, studded with holographic projectors and gravitational field generators. The floor was segmented into hundreds of panels, each capable of shifting, rising, or becoming suddenly very interested in ejecting whoever was standing on it. Around the perimeter, observation platforms held instructors, medical personnel, and several species whose job descriptions included phrases like trauma response and rapid extraction. 50 cadets spread across the arena floor, automatically creating distance between themselves and potential threats. Species with natural camouflage abilities began testing the environment's compatibility with their adaptive pigmentation. Species with enhanced sensory capabilities mapped the space in spectrums most others couldn't perceive. Species with diplomatic inclinations began forming temporary alliances that would last approximately 15 seconds after the exercise began. Krath'nar naturally positioned himself in the center of the arena. Maximum visibility, optimal angle for dramatic posing. Close enough to multiple opponents to establish dominance quickly. He cracked his knuckles, which sounded like artillery fire, and made several nearby cadets flinch reflexively. The human had selected a position near the arena's edge, where the walls met the floor in a gradual curve. Not hidden exactly, not exposed either, just positioned with the spatial awareness of someone who understood that controlling your immediate environment meant controlling your survival options. She rolled her shoulders slowly, a gesture that seemed almost meditative. "Notice the human's strategy," Krathnar's voice carried across the arena with the subtlety of an orbital strike. "Hiding at the edges, hoping to avoid engagement while stronger fighters eliminate each other. This is what we call wisdom born from weakness. Admirable, in its way, like watching a scavenger wait for predators to finish their meal." Several cadets laughed nervously. Others simply focused on their own preparation, having learned that attention during Krathnar's monologues was often the prelude to becoming his demonstration partner. The human said nothing, just kept breathing, steady and controlled, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the rhythm of someone performing a ritual that meant something beyond simple oxygen exchange. Instructor Malvex's voice cut through the pre-exercise tension. "Exercise begins in 30 seconds. Reminder that this is a training exercise, not a blood sport. That said, injury is probable. Complaints will be documented and subsequently ignored." 20 seconds. Krath'nar dropped into a combat stance that emphasized his considerable physical advantages. Legs braced, center of gravity lowered, arms positioned for maximum striking force. Around the arena, other cadets prepared according to their species' particular combat methodologies. The Zephon coiled their limbs for explosive movement. The Gorath simply stood there, because when you mass 400 kilograms, anything resembling agility is optimistic thinking. The pipsqueakers formed a small cluster and began chattering in ultrasonic frequencies, which meant they were either coordinating tactics or gossiping about lunch plans. 10 seconds. Final equipment checks recommended. The human shifted her weight forward slightly, knees bent, hands open at her sides. Her expression had settled into something approaching serenity, which made absolutely no sense given the impending violence and made several observers deeply uncomfortable. 5 seconds. Remember, injury is expected, but fatality is discouraged. Krathnar's eyes locked onto the human across the arena. His mandibles spread in what his species considered a grin, but what most species considered a prelude to being eaten. After this exercise, little human, you will understand why soft species remain soft. 3, 2, 1. Exercise commenced. The arena erupted into controlled chaos. Cadets launched themselves at the nearest opponents with varying degrees of strategy and enthusiasm. The Zephon moved like liquid violence, their multiple limbs striking from angles that seemed geometrically impossible. The Gorath simply walked forward, relying on momentum and mass to solve most problems. The pipsqueakers scattered in 17 different directions, which was either brilliant tactics or complete panic. Krath'nar moved with surprising speed for his mass, crossing the arena floor toward a cluster of 3 cadets who had made the fatal error of standing too close together. His first strike sent a Vryn tumbling across the floor panels. His second strike made a Keltharian reconsider several life choices. His third strike was interrupted by an environmental hazard as the floor beneath him suddenly shifted elevation, forcing him to adjust his balance. Gravity increase detected, the automated system announced helpfully, now set to 1.4 standard. The change affected different species differently. The Gorath barely noticed. The pipsqueakers suddenly found movement significantly more challenging. Krath'nar adapted within seconds, his species having evolved under similar conditions. He laughed, because of course he did, and resumed his systematic dismantling of anything that moved within his reach. Across the arena, the human was moving. Not running, exactly, moving with purpose, utilizing cover provided by the mobile obstacles that randomly traversed the arena floor. She engaged a Zephon who had gotten separated from his allies, the fight lasting perhaps 10 seconds before the Zephon yielded, confusion evident in his body language. She hadn't defeated him through superior strength. She had simply made continuing the fight more trouble than it was worth through precisely targeted strikes that turned his natural agility against him. Krath'nar noticed. Of course he noticed. Champions notice everything that might threaten their status or provide entertainment value. The human survives, his voice boomed across the chaos. How delightful! Perhaps she deserves a proper opponent after all. He dispatched his current engagement with a casual backhand that sent a cadet into the safety extraction zone, triggering the automatic medical response. Remain there, little human. I am coming to educate you in the fundamentals of combat. The human turned to face him across the arena floor. The distance between them was perhaps 30 meters. Mobile obstacles moved through the space on their programmed paths. Other cadets fought around them, unaware that the exercise was about to become dramatically more interesting. Krath'nar began walking forward, not running, walking, making it clear through body language alone that he considered this less a fight and more a scheduled demolition. His footsteps registered on the seismic monitors, each impact a small declaration of mass and intent. The human stood her ground, waiting, always waiting. Her breathing remained steady despite the elevated gravity. Her hands stayed relaxed despite the approaching threat. And that smile, that small predator's smile, appeared at the corner of her mouth. Tell me, human, Krath'nar called out as he closed the distance. What is your planet's gravity again? 0.97 standard, yes? Tell me, how does your species survive with such pathetic environmental resistance? Do you simply fall down frequently and hope for the best? 20 meters. Your skeletal structure is calcium-based, I have read. Calcium! I have consumed minerals harder than your bones as dietary supplements. 15 meters. And your muscle density, absolutely fascinating. So compact, so efficient, so completely inadequate for actual combat applications. 10 meters. The human's stance shifted almost imperceptibly. Weight redistributed, center of gravity adjusted. Something in her expression changed, a predator recognizing the moment before the strike. 5 meters. This has been entertaining, little human, but the lesson must conclude. I promise to be gentle. We would not want to damage the Coalition's adorable new mascot species permanently. Krath'nar lunged forward, arms extended for a simple grab that would end the engagement immediately through overwhelming strength advantage. Standard tactics, proven effective, completely reliable against opponents who lacked the physical capability to resist. The human moved. The human moved with precision that contradicted every assessment of her species' physical limitations. She didn't dodge Krathnar's lunge. She redirected it, using his momentum against him in a way that suggested intimate knowledge of physics that most species needed computers to calculate. Her hands found pressure points on his extended arms, not striking but guiding, turning his attack into a stumble that carried him past. Her position. Krath'nar recovered instantly because champions don't stay off balance long. He spun with remarkable agility for something his size, mandibles spread in what was definitely not a smile anymore. Clever. You have learned tricks, but tricks only delay the inevitable. He came at her again, this time with calculated strikes instead of simple grabs. His fists moved like industrial pistons, each blow carrying enough force to dent reinforced plating. The human weaved between the attacks, her movements economical and deliberate. She wasn't faster than him. She was simply never quite where he expected her to be. The arena had gone quiet. Other cadets had stopped their own engagements to watch. Even the instructors leaned forward on their observation platforms, recognition dawning that this was not proceeding according to standard patterns. Krathnar's frustration manifested as increased aggression, which was exactly the wrong tactical adjustment. He overextended on a powerful haymaker that would have ended the fight instantly if it had connected. It did not connect. The human ducked beneath the strike, closing distance rather than creating it, moving inside his reach where his size became a disadvantage. And then she kicked him, not a wild kick born of desperation. A precise, calculated strike delivered with her right leg, aimed at the specific junction where Krathnar's spinal column connected to his pelvic structure. The impact point was exact. The force was concentrated. The angle was perfect. Earth's gravity was indeed only 0.97 standard. But Earth's gravity was constant, unforgiving, and had spent millions of years shaping human evolution into something that could generate explosive force from seemingly delicate frames. The human leg, evolution had decided, was not just for locomotion. It was a weapon system wrapped in skin and driven by muscle groups that could generate force equivalent to several times the being's total body mass. The kick connected with a sound that made medical personnel across the galaxy collectively wince. Krathnar's expression transformed from arrogance to shock to something approaching disbelief. His spine, designed to support his considerable mass under his homeworld's brutal gravity, encountered a force vector it had never anticipated. Biology, even impressive biology, had limits when physics got involved. The crack was audible across the entire arena. Krath'nar collapsed. Not fell, collapsed. His legs stopped responding to neural commands because the neural pathway had been catastrophically interrupted. He hit the arena floor with enough force to trigger 3 separate seismic sensors, his body completely limp from the midsection down. The automated medical system responded instantly, emergency fields activating to stabilize the injured cadet. Medical personnel swarmed from their stations, equipment already deployed. The exercise terminated immediately, alarm klaxons wailing across the facility. The human stood over him, breathing hard now, sweat visible on her forehead. She looked down at the fallen champion, and her expression was entirely unreadable. Commander Vraxen's voice carried across the observation deck, quiet enough that only those nearby heard him. I tried to warn the committee. Humans don't need to be the strongest. They just need to know exactly where to strike. He paused, watching the medical team work. Evolution is a creative problem solver, and Earth apparently presented some very interesting problems. The human cadet walked slowly toward the extraction zone, her gait slightly uneven from the recoil of her own strike. Behind her, Krath'nar was being loaded onto a medical transport, his eyes open but his body unresponsive. The adorable mascot species had just fractured the Academy's combat record along with the champion's spine. The medical bay buzzed with activity that would have been comedic if it weren't so professionally executed. Dr. Veltheon, a Kryn whose 6 manipulator appendages moved with surgical precision, hovered over the scanning equipment displaying Krathnar's spinal column in 3-dimensional holographic detail. The damage was impressive in the way natural disasters are impressive when viewed from a safe distance. Fractured vertebrae at junction point 7, neural pathway disruption across 3 segments, muscular trauma extending through the entire lower support structure, Veltheon reported to Commander Vraxen with clinical detachment. The strike targeted the weakest structural point with remarkable accuracy, almost surgical, if surgery was performed by someone with a comprehensive understanding of biomechanics and a very strong leg. Krath'nar lay on the medical platform, conscious but sedated, his eyes tracking movement in the room with growing comprehension of what had occurred. His mandibles moved silently, as if testing whether speech was still possible. It was, technically, though pride was significantly more damaged than vocal cords. "Recovery time?" Vraxen asked, though his attention was divided between the medical readouts and the data pad displaying incident reports that were multiplying faster than administrative staff could process them. 6 weeks with accelerated healing protocols, full combat capability in 8, assuming no complications. Veltheon's sensory stalk swiveled toward the commander. "The human has been examined as well. Minor muscle strain in the right leg. She refused further treatment and returned to duty rotation." Of course she did. News of the incident spread through the Academy's communication networks with the speed of information that was simultaneously catastrophic and entertaining. By the 2nd rotation, every cadet knew the details. By the 3rd, several species had begun requesting transfers into human combat training observation groups. By the 4th, the Xenobiology Department had submitted emergency requests for increased research, funding to study Earth's evolutionary pressures. The betting pools, which technically violated Academy regulations but which everyone knew existed anyway, underwent massive restructuring. Odds on human cadets in combat scenarios shifted dramatically. Several bookmakers filed formal complaints about unforeseen variables disrupting their carefully calculated risk assessments. The human cadet, whose name had become simultaneously legendary and cautiously respected, continued her training schedule without apparent concern for the chaos she had triggered. She attended lectures, participated in exercises, and maintained the same methodical approach to military education that had characterized her performance since arrival. When questioned by curious classmates about the incident, her response was consistent and unhelpful. "I kicked him. He fell down. Medical handled it." "Next question?" Commander Vraxen filed his incident report with specific attention to detail. The conclusion section contained a single recommendation that would influence coalition military policy for the next decade. Recommend immediate revision of threat assessment protocols regarding Earth origin species. Previous classifications of humans as physically limited require substantial adjustment. Further recommend that combat instructors stop laughing when humans enter the training arena. It ages poorly. Somewhere in the medical bay, Krath'nar stared at the ceiling and contemplated the humbling reality that sometimes the softest-looking species hit the hardest. Evolution, it turned out, had been paying attention even when everyone else had not. the universe had indeed presented Earth with interesting problems. Humanity's solutions were proving equally interesting to anyone foolish enough to underestimate them.